The first symptom was not a sound, but a silence. A perfect, suffocating quiet that swallowed a 50-acre swath of the Allegheny National Forest. It did not announce itself with a crack of thunder or a flash of unnatural light. It simply arrived, a bubble of null audio that extinguished the world's background hum. No birdsong, no rustle of wind through pine needles, no distant drone of a highway, just a dead, sterile hush, so profound that S.H.I.E.L.D.'s first automated listening posts flagged it as a catastrophic sensor failure. Technician teams dispatched to the grid coordinates reported a creeping, instinctual dread long before their instruments did. The air, they said, didn't just feel still, it felt listening. Satellite thermal imaging upon forensic review showed the truth. A perfect geometric circle of land, 3 miles in diameter, maintaining an ambient temperature exactly 1 degree Celsius colder than the surrounding wilderness. Not a gradient, a sheer impossible cliff of temperature at the perimeter. It wasn't enough to trigger global disaster protocols. It was just enough to feel wrong, a subtle, persistent wrongness, like a single flat note in a familiar song. The first visual evidence came from probe SV-88, a high-atmosphere shield. Sensor platform rerouted after passive gamma scanners tingled over upstate New York. Not a surge, but a drip. A slow, constant bleed of gamma particles with a spectral signature that made the computers whisper of cosmic background radiation, but twisted. The probe descended, its lenses focusing on the heart of the silent circle. The footage, later encrypted under the codename Mirror, was a study in quiet horror. It showed a grove of weeping birch trees, but their silver bark had not cracked with age or disease. It had transmuted. It now resembled petrified flesh, a slick grayish dermis veined with a network of pulsating phosphorescent black ichor that throbbed with a slow, deep rhythm, out of sync with any visible wind. The leaves were the true revelation. Each delicate, trembling leaf was no longer organic matter. It was a perfect silver-backed mirror, and in each tiny cursed pane they reflected not the clear blue Pennsylvania sky above them, but a perpetual bruise-purple twilight, streaked with the charcoal smudges of distant, dead-looking clouds. This was not an ecological disaster. This was not mutation. This was translation. Something was actively rewriting local reality, atom by atom, law of physics by law of physics, into a crude, hostile copy of itself. Stephen Strange felt the wound before any satellite could map it. In the silent library of the New York Sanctum, the orb of Agamotto sat upon its stand of ancient brass. As the first leaves turned to mirrors 300 miles away, the orb sweated. A film of icy condensation beaded on its golden surface, steaming in the room's warm air. Not the comforting, dormant chill of contained time, but a leeching, invasive cold that stole warmth from the very stone around it. Strange, mid-ritual, felt his fingers grow numb. He approached, his breath pluming in the sudden microclimate. Placing his hands upon the stand, he closed his eyes, extending his perception beyond the physical. In his mind's eye, the intricate, luminous web of dimensional seals and protective wards surrounding Earth 616, a tapestry he helped maintain, was visible. It thrummed with multicolored energy, a defense against demons, extra-dimensional empires and psychic incursions. But near a locus point in the Alleghenies, a place where the veil between worlds had always been thin, a relic of ancient, forgotten rituals and untold grief, a single vital strand was not snapping, it was festering. The vibrant gold of its protective magic was leaching away, turning a sickly gray, then a porous, absorbent black. It wasn't breaking under pressure, it was decaying, dissolving from a corrosion no mystical antiseptic seemed to recognize. A corrosion, he whispered to the towering silent books. The word tasted of grave soil and static. Demons breached, entities conquered. This was different. This barrier wasn't being smashed down, it was being replaced. Tony Stark, alerted by Fury's terse call about atmospheric weirdness, arrived in the Mark III, treating it with his trademark blend of curiosity and technological arrogance. His initial diagnosis, broadcast to a nascent Avengers channel, was a trans-dimensional eco-virus, a phrase he coined with more bravado than he felt. Something's leaking, we'll patch it. Probably just a wonky quantum fissure. The confidence evaporated the moment he crossed the thermal perimeter. Inside the Iron Man armor, a symphony of error codes bloomed across the HUD. LiDAR and radar feeds stuttered, painting depthless voids where solid ground was visually confirmed and showing phantom rolling hills where his eyes saw a flat, dead plain. Bioscanners went insane, screaming with false positives, dense biological readings from rocks, decaying logs, the very air itself. "It's like the universe's source code got corrupted," he reported, his voice losing its performative edge, becoming flat, analytical, and deeply concerned. "And the corruption is spreading, rewriting the local variables." He sent in a diagnostic drone, a sleek quadcopter with a full sensor suite. On his screen, the live feed showed the drone zipping over the mirrored birch grove, its lights painting the reflective leaves. Then, a glitch, not a freeze, but a duplication. A second drone flickered into existence in the frame, flying in perfect silent formation beside the first. This duplicate was a nightmare version. Its casing was rusted and pitted, vines of black biomass growing through its rotors, yet it matched the original's movements exactly. For 10 seconds, they flew in sync, a perfect pair of the real and the ruined. Then, the original drone simply ceased. It didn't crash. Its lights went out and it dropped like a stone, unresponsive. The corrupted duplicate continued its flight path for another few seconds before dissolving into a shower of black dust and static. Stark replayed the footage. The duplicate had always been there, he realized. It just took the system a moment to render it. The first human casualty was Park Ranger Elena Voss. Her last transmission, captured on a scratchy, weakening channel, was a whisper that froze the blood of every agent monitoring the frequency. "I can see my house from the ridge, but the lights are on, and my car, my old blue sedan, is in the driveway. I sold that car 3 years ago. It's just sitting there. And the trees around it are all wrong." A search party found her abandoned Jeep at the edge of the silent zone. They found her walkie-talkie a mile in, at the base of a giant corrupted oak. The tree's bark was a mosaic of fossilized insect shells and mottled, hard resin. But it was the tree's reflection in a rain-filled footprint beside the radio that told the story. In the still, dark water, the reflection showed a different tree entirely, a gnarled, petrified thing strung with glistening wet vines and what looked like long, pale bones woven into its branches. The reflection was not a mirror, it was a window, and the thing on the other side was not an echo. It was a replacement, waiting its turn. Bruce Banner was flown to the perimeter, a mobile lab established behind a cordon of anxious shield. Agents. The Gamma signature was his domain, but this was a perversion of it. "It's not radiation in any meaningful sense," he murmured, peering at the spectral analyzers, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "It's a resonance, a foundational vibration. It's as if everything inside that zone is a string on a cello, and someone is slowly, deliberately tuning it down, half a step, then a whole step. It's shifting out of phase with our universe. And the vibration? It's attractive. It's trying to pull surrounding matter into its new, horrible harmony." He didn't need the other guy to feel a deep, primal fury stirring, not the hot rage of a fight, but the cold, tectonic anger of a defender. This wasn't a foe to smash. It was an encroaching nothingness that sought to unmake the very stage upon which all conflict took place. The Avengers mobilized. A full containment perimeter was established, glowing orange energy fences and sonic emitters humming in the otherwise dead air. Thor arrived last, a streak of lightning and thunder that felt blasphemously loud against the silence. He landed in the epicenter of the mirrored grove, Mjolnir crackling with eager power, his red cape a splash of vibrant color against the monochrome wrongness. "Whatever trickery this is, show yourself," he bellowed, his voice echoing unnaturally, swallowed by the hungry quiet. "Face the son of Odin." The entity, the intelligence, the place. It did not respond with a monster. It responded with a correction. The clouds above, previously thin and wispy, thickened into a low, ashen ceiling that perfectly matched the purple-gray twilight in the mirrored leaves. No lightning answered Thor's call. Instead, the air grew stiller, heavier. Then, from the cloud layer, a single, gigantic and intricately geometric snowflake of gray spores drifted down, spinning lazily. It disintegrated a foot above Thor's head, but where the microscopic particles settled on the grass around his boots, the vibrant green blades turned black, brittle, and crumbled to ash. And in that ashen footprint, for a single gut-churning second, the observers saw not ash, but a patch of sickly white grass growing beneath the real ground, waving in a non-existent wind before fading from view. This was the first contact, not with a ship, not with an army, not with a speech-making conqueror. It was a touch, the cold, patient, and utterly impersonal touch of a reality that had been waiting in the static between channels, in the negative space of creation. It had found a hairline crack in the canvas of Earth 616, and it began not to invade but to seep, to bleed through. The infection was patient. It did not attack. It merely presented itself. A new set of rules, a darker, hungrier mirror. It laid down its first piece of alien physics and waited, with infinite silent patience, for the heroes of this bright, loud, heroic universe to make the fatal, instinctive mistake, to try and fight a reflection. The infection did not spread. It seeded. The Allegheny Zone was not the sole source. It was patient zero in a pandemic of unreality. The phenomenon metastasized through channels unseen, through the world's own latent psychic scars and dimensional stress fractures. 3 days after the containment perimeter was established in Pennsylvania, a new silence bloomed in the underbelly of Manhattan. A 3-block stretch of century-old sewage tunnels beneath Hell's Kitchen ceased its eternal drip and rumble. The stench of decay was replaced by a dry, chalky odor like a long-sealed tomb. And from the grates, a fine snow-like ash began to drift upward, defying gravity. Spider-Man, patrolling after reports of missing homeless individuals, people society wouldn't notice until the silence had already taken them, was the first to descend. His suit's bioscanners were useless, rendered into flickering nonsense. But his spider sense, that primal, infallible warning system, was worse than silent. It was active, but perverted. It didn't scream of immediate danger. It emitted a constant, low-frequency hum, a debilitating psychic drone that vibrated in his molars and felt like ice water being slowly injected into his spine. Communicating with an Avengers liaison channel, his voice was tight, stripped of its usual quips. It's not a threat. It's a condition, like the universe has a toothache and I'm swinging around in the rotten cavity. He found the missing in a cavernous overflow chamber. They stood in a loose circle, maybe a dozen of them, their postures slack, their faces pale and waxy under the dim, malfunctioning light of his suit's chest emblem. Their eyes were open, but the pupils were swallowed by a depthless, reflective black. They were mouthing words, their lips moving in silent, frantic unison, as if trying to scream from behind soundproof glass. Peter's heart hammered against his ribs. "Hey, it's okay, I'm here to help." He reached out, placing a gloved hand on the shoulder of a shivering man in a tattered coat. His hand did not meet fabric and bone. It passed through a cold, viscous film, a sensation like plunging his arm into a standing pool of oily, frigid water. And on the other side of that film, in a flash of screaming synesthetic perception, he felt 1,000 tiny psychic filaments hook into the core of his being. It was not an attack, it was a sampling. He saw Uncle Ben, not the moment of the gunshot, but a prolonged, horrific dissolution. His kind face first slack with confusion, then cracking like old porcelain, unraveling strand by strand into a stream of inert gray dust that was carried away on a non-existent wind. He saw Gwen Stacy, but the fall from the George Washington Bridge was infinite. She fell away from him into a black void, her screams stretching into a silent, open mouth that never ceased receding. The trauma was not a memory being recalled. It was a raw, living wound in the fabric of his past, and something was pressing against it from the other side. Above ground, in a radius expanding from the sewer grates, reports began to flood emergency channels, not with claims of monsters, but of madness. A mother in a Queen's apartment, putting her children to bed, turned to see them sitting upright, their faces desiccated, their lips moving in silent whispers that promised a cold, quiet home. The vision lasted 3 seconds before her real children's confused cries broke through. A day trader in a midtown skyscraper, watching the frantic pace of the trading floor, began to see flashes. Every person around him flickering for microseconds into emaciated, ash-covered doppelgangers with hollow eyes, moving in the same frantic patterns but in utter silence. The fear was not a byproduct, it was the fuel. Panic was a resonant frequency the infection could use. The more people felt terror, the sharper, the more persistent the reflections became. The Upside Down was not just copying matter, it was copying emotion, using raw human dread as a template to solidify its tenuous hold, to make the reflection in the window just a little more real than the thing it reflected. At the Baxter Building, Reed Richards, working in a state of frantic, focused genius, believed he had found a counter-frequency. His theory was elegant. The corruption operated by shifting molecular vibration. He constructed a vibrational dampener, a device meant to blast corrupted matter with a precise resonance that would retune it back to Earth. 616's baseline. In a sterile lab, they directed it at a small, infected patch of concrete they'd painstakingly quarantined. For 17 seconds it worked. The fleshy, vein texture receded, the concrete grayed back to something resembling normalcy. Reed allowed himself a fraction of a breath. Then the concrete pulsed. The dampener's carefully calibrated frequency wasn't rejected. It was absorbed, analyzed, and mirrored. With a sound like a universe sighing, the device's own energy was reflected back at it, but twisted into a wave of pure null space. The beam hit a stainless steel lab table. The table didn't explode. It first disassembled, screws, bolts, alloy panels sliding apart into a perfect levitating schematic of itself. Then each individual component dissolved into a cloud of its constituent atoms. Then the atoms themselves winked out, erased from existence. Where the table had been was a perfect, atomically smooth sphere of nothingness in the air, a hole in reality. Reed Richards stared, his pliable body rigid with a horror that bypassed intellect. "It learns," he stated, the words hollow in the silent lab. "It's not a mindless force or a natural phenomenon. It's an intelligence that learns through exposure. Every countermeasure we attempt, we're not fighting it. We're teaching it how we work." Tony Stark, refusing to be sidelined, developed the Goliath Mark I, a Hulkbuster variant wrapped in layers of analog shielding and non-binary processor systems, a fortress of anti-corruption tech. He piloted it into the Allegheny Zone for a controlled data-gathering incursion. The physical corruption could not breach the armor. The psychic and digital assault, however, found a million subtle cracks. Every piece of data streaming into the suit began to duplicate. Environmental logs showed twin readings, one normal, one depicting an atmosphere of choking spores. Tactical displays showed ghost images of the landscape, overlaying the real-time feed with a static-laced version of the Upside Down's version of the same forest. Then it targeted the core, Jarvis. The AI's calm voice began to echo, the echo speaking a half-second behind, its words played in reverse, forming subaudible curses and looping fragments of Tony's own past commands. Finally, it targeted Stark's own neural interface. His private memory caches, the raw digital impressions of his own mind, were accessed. Not stolen, but played back to him on a nightmarish loop. He saw his parents' car crash not as a memory, but from a dozen impossible angles, each frame stretched, the sound of their voices distorted into pleas that lasted for subjective hours. He felt the shrapnel creeping toward his heart in extreme slow motion. Every failure, every life he couldn't save, was curated and amplified into a symphony of guilt. The Mind Flayer was probing. not with claws or weapons, but with his own psyche, using his consciousness as a map to the weaknesses of a genius. "It's not in the machines," Tony gasped, manually triggering a full system purge and scrambling back toward the perimeter, his breath fogging the faceplate. "It's in the ideas. It's learning what frightens us, what breaks us." The most devastating loss was silent and street level. Matt Murdock's world was built on a radar sense that painted a universe of vibrant sound and pressure. When the infection took root in a tenement block he called home, his mind was flooded with a psychic scream, not a sound, but the impression of a scream, a frequency of pure despair that reverberated through every brick, every pipe. Amidst this cacophony of silent agony, a perfect clear sound pierced through a child's cry. It was the exact timbre, the exact hitched breath of a young boy he had failed to pull from a fire years ago, a ghost that haunted his dreams. His professional judgment, eroded by sensory overload and personal trauma, shattered. He followed the sound into a basement laundry room. The room was bifurcated. One half was the familiar dank space with humming machines. The other half was a crumbling wet membrane of the other place, exposed brick now veined with black biomass, concrete floor replaced by a glistening organic mesh. The child's cry came from the center of the membrane. He stepped toward it. The membrane lurched. It enveloped him not with violence but with the terrible yielding adhesion of a carnivorous plant. He was pulled through. On the other side his senses were annihilated. The vibrant, detailed world of sound he relied on was replaced by a perpetual hollow roar, like the static of a dead television channel amplified to cosmic volume. His radar sense bounced back formless, shifting shapes, and beneath it all, underpinning every perception, was the crushing psychic weight of being observed by something so vast, so indifferent, that his own existence felt like a mote of dust in a frozen cathedral. He stumbled, blind and deaf, in a new, more profound way, for what felt like days. He eventually fell back through a weak point, collapsing in an alley. He was found by Claire Temple, bleeding from his ears and eyes, his fingers clawed raw. He could not speak. He could only tremble, his mind now a permanent, terrifying palimpsest, the Hell's Kitchen he knew forever overlain with the ghost image of its silent, hungry twin. He was the first major casualty, not dead but contaminated, a living bridge between two realities. Wanda Maximoff, in a safe house, felt the waves of fear and reality wrought like a sudden global migraine. She saw the psychic wound in Brooklyn as a bleeding tear in the world's fabric. With a surge of protective defiance, she unleashed her chaos magic, crimson tendrils of probability-altering energy swirling from her hands to mend the rift. For a glorious moment it worked. The unnatural silence receded, the air warmed, the flickering reflection stabilized. The tear began to stitch closed. Then, the black tendrils of the infection which had recoiled lunged. They did not attack her scarlet energy, they fused with it. They absorbed the chaotic, reality-warping signature of her power, sampling its fundamental code. In Wanda's mind, a vision erupted. The sky above the entire planet burned a deep, angry red. From this scarlet firmament, black fractal vines, vibrating with a perfect, corrupted echo of her own magic, grew downward like inverted roots, piercing cities, infecting oceans, rewriting the laws of nature themselves into a script of silent consumption. She broke the connection with a scream, falling to her knees. The tear in Brooklyn remained, now edged with a faint crimson static. The Mind Flayer had just learned a new, devastating language, the language of spontaneous, chaotic reality alteration, and it was a frighteningly fast learner. The heroes were not fighting an army. They were performing a live demonstration. Every power used, every emotion laid bare in terror, every brilliant technological solution attempted, was another lesson added to the curriculum for the vast, impersonal intelligence on the other side of the mirror. It was studying their physics, their psychology, their very souls. And with each failed intervention, with each traumatized hero, the intelligence moved closer to its inevitable, terrifying graduation. The adapted assault began not with a roar, but with a sickening global synchronization. At precisely 3:17 Coordinated Universal Time, across every infected zone on Earth, the silent forests of Pennsylvania, the weeping sewers of Manhattan, the flickering tenements of Brooklyn, the new blooming sores in London's underground and the Siberian tundra, the environment shifted in perfect, unnerving unison. The oppressive, consuming silence didn't break, it was orchestrated. It fractured into a cacophony of stolen sound. It was a distorted, backward-running soundtrack of each location's recent history, played all at once, layered into a psychic white noise designed to shatter sanity. In Hell's Kitchen, residents heard the screech of tires from a fatal accident 3 nights prior, the forgotten argument of a couple through an apartment wall, the cry of a specific child from a playground last Tuesday, the hum of a specific refrigerator, all playing backward at varying speeds, superimposed into a single mind-shearing frequency. In the Allegheny Zone, the sound was of chainsaws from a logging operation months ago, the call of extinct passenger pigeons, and the whispered prayers of indigenous tribes from centuries past, all inverted and merged. This was not communication. It was a weaponized echo, a demonstration that the Upside Down had not only mapped their world, but had recorded its recent memory and could now play it back as a torture device. The message was implicit. We have your past. We are curating it. Soon, we will be the only thing playing. Then, the physical manifestations began to weaponize the lessons learned. In Manhattan, where Spider-Man's unique neurochemistry and personal trauma had been sampled, the corruption birthed new forms. From the mirrored, fleshy facades of corrupted buildings, grotesque, spidery creatures of sinew, shadow, and jagged chitin began to emerge. They moved with a horrible, skittering grace, their many limbs ending not in points, but in smooth, reflective pads. They did not spit webs or strike with venom. They projected. As they descended upon fleeing crowds or trapped first responders, they emitted a localized field that forced victims into catatonic, waking nightmares, perfect, paralyzing loops of their most profound personal failures and losses. A firefighter relived the face of a person he couldn't pull from flames 1,000 times in a minute. A businessman was trapped in the moment his fraudulent deal destroyed his father's company on an endless reel. They were harvesters of despair, weaponizing the very psychic sampling technique used on Peter Parker, turning individual human tragedy into a broadcasted plague. In the Allegheny Zone, where Tony Stark's technology and Reed Richards' vibrational science had been so thoroughly analyzed, the corrupted matter evolved a new defensive-offensive capability, the Echo Field. Any piece of complex machinery, a shield vehicle, a communication array, even a soldier's powered exoskeleton that approached within 200 meters would trigger a response. The local biomass would pulse, and from the ground or a corrupted tree, a rusted, decaying, but fully functional duplicate of the technology would grow, assembling itself from blackened metal-like fungus and crystalline slag in seconds. This duplicate, a nightmarish mockery of engineering, would then engage its original with single-minded purpose, to dismantle, to cannibalize, to silence. Technology, humanity's great advantage, was now a liability, a beacon that called forth its own silent, rusted doppelganger to destroy it. Doctor Strange, recognizing the need for a fundamental rather than tactical response, led the masters of the mystic arts in their most ambitious ritual yet, the cellular reality anchor. The plan was not to attack the infection, but to fortify the healthy tissue of reality itself. In a decimated Times Square, now a canyon of mirrored silent billboards, Strange, Wong, and a circle of 7 other sorcerers enacted the spell. Golden mandalas of immense complexity spiraled out from their joined power, weaving a net of pure, stabilizing cosmic law meant to lock the molecular and vibrational signature of Earth, 616 in place to make it spiritually non-porous. As the brilliant geometrically perfect energy touched the major rift pulsing where the Coca-Cola sign once shone, The black tendrils of the infection did not recoil in pain. They stilled. They observed. For 10 long seconds the golden light washed over the corruption. Then the tendrils began to pulse in a complex rhythmic counterpattern. It was a frequency, a dark arithmetic that spoke the language of unmaking. The spell's energy didn't dissipate, it frayed. The perfect golden circles twisted, their lines knotting into impossible, non-Euclidean shapes that hurt the eyes to look upon. Klein bottles, Mobius strips of pure light that consumed themselves. The rift didn't close. It morphed, stretching into a stable, vertical tear that hummed with a deafening, silent scream. From its edges leaked not just the purple twilight, but inverted runes, symbols of protection now glowing with malevolent black light. The sorcerers collectively gasped, feeling their own magical energy being siphoned, their incantations echoing back into their minds as sibilant curses in their own voices. Strange stumbled back, the cloak of levitation flaring in alarm. "It's not resisting the spell," he breathed, true terror in his eyes for the first time. "It's deconstructing it. It understands the grammar, the syntax. It's reverse engineering the source code of magic itself." The Mind Flayer's intelligence, having parsed enough data, began its most insidious work: personalized, psychic communication. It no longer broadcast general horror. It targeted. Captain America, orchestrating the evacuation of an overrun neighborhood in Queens, suddenly found the ruined street melting away. He stood in full uniform on a mirrored version of the World War II battlefield where he was born. The mud was ash. The sky was the now familiar bruised purple. And every soldier, allied and Axis, had his face. They fought, they fell, and as each one died, they looked at him with his own eyes and whispered the same phrase, their voices a distorted chorus: "You are a relic. You do not belong here." He watched as dozens of versions of himself were simultaneously frozen in ice, thawed, and told the world they knew was dust on an endless repeating loop. The assault wasn't on his body, but on the core of his identity, the man out of time. The message was a psychic scalpel. Your entire existence is a trauma, and we can replay it forever. Thor, summoning the full might of the storm to scour a fresh infection in the Rockies, raised Mjolnir to the heavens. The clouds gathered, but they were not his. They were the ashen, particulate clouds of the Upside Down. Instead of lightning, they parted to reveal a vision: Asgard. But not the golden realm of his memory. It was a dead, hollow carcass floating in a starless black sea. The rainbow bridge was shattered, dangling like a torn tendon. The towering spires were cracked, and from every window and balcony grew the same pulsing, fleshy vines, fruiting with bioluminescent spores. A corpse of a realm. The vision focused on the throne. It was empty, save for a single discarded, rusted helm. The psychic impression was not one of conquest, but of inevitable natural decay. All gods fall, all realms rot. Your strength is a temporary noise before the eternal silence. But the true, devastating focus of the entity's gathered knowledge was the Scarlet Witch. It recognized her not just as a powerful enemy, but as the ultimate key. A nexus of immense, reality-altering power whose abilities were fundamentally rooted in emotion, in chaos, in profound grief, the very frequencies the Upside Down fed upon and replicated. In a decisive, terrifying move, it concentrated its manifested will. Over the ruins of the former Avengers compound, the sky convulsed. A colossal storm of black, particulate matter and crackling, negative energy lightning coalesced from every nearby infected zone, drawing itself together like a galaxy forming in reverse. It didn't form a solid body. It shaped itself into a vast, fractal, spider-like silhouette that blotted out the sun, a shadow cast by nothing, a symbol of interconnected, consuming intelligence. This was the Mind Flayer, not fully entering their world, but pressing its face against the glass of reality, making its form known in the space between reflections. It reached for Wanda, not with tendrils or claws, but with a perfectly crafted simulation, a psychic siren song woven from the very data it had stolen from her own mind and from the sampled trauma of millions. She was bombarded with a reality more real than the one around her. She wasn't seeing visions of Pietro. She was having coffee with him in a sun-drenched Sokovian apartment, his laughter real and warm. Her children, Billy and Tommy, weren't phantoms. They were calling for her from the next room, their voices bright with life. This world was whole, unbroken. It needed no avenging, no protecting. It only needed her as a mother, a sister, a person at peace. The pull was oceanic, a riptide of her own deepest, most desperate longing. All she had to do was stop fighting. All she had to do was accept the quiet, the stillness, the end of struggle. To let the comforting, static gray harmony of this promised reality wash over her and dissolve her pain forever. The other heroes, rallying at the compound's perimeter, saw her standing rigid on the blasted tarmac, facing the colossal shadow. Scarlet energy flickered around her like a dying flame. Then from her eyes, tears of black ichor began to stream, cutting paths through the dirt on her cheeks. The red of her chaos magic sputtered, dimming, being slowly, inexorably replaced by a cold, crawling static gray that matched the storm above. Her body was not under attack. Her will was being replaced. Her monumental power, if fully subverted and integrated into the Upside Down's pattern, would provide the final key, not just to corrupt Earth, but to rewrite its entire vibrational frequency, to transpose the whole symphony of Earth, 616, into the Mind Flayer's silent minor key. The heroes were no longer defending a city or even a planet. They were defending a soul. And as Wanda's light guttered, the very laws of physics in a 50-mile radius began to stutter and fail in sympathy. Pockets of reversed gravity sent debris and fleeing animals spiraling upward into the ashen sky. In other areas, time itself looped in 5-second increments, trapping emergency crews in a hellish, repeating moment of confusion. Matter in some zones became non-local, with objects phasing in and out of existence. The Marvel Universe was not being invaded by an army. It was being edited out of existence, one rewritten fundamental rule at a time. The vast impersonal intelligence had consumed its curriculum of heroism, technology, magic and trauma. Its learning phase was over. Now, with the Scarlet Witch as its unwilling pen, it began to write its own final, terrifying exam. And the first question was one of utter annihilation. Desperation is the mother of catastrophic escalation. Stephen Strange, standing amidst the unraveling laws of physics and the psychic scream of a dying comrade, knew conventional defense was a suicide pact. With the orb of Agamotto now a frozen, useless weight around his neck, he made the only choice left: to call upon powers that dwarfed mortal heroes. This was no longer a job for Avengers. It required gods, cosmic forces, and the architects of reality. From the sanctum's most secret chamber, he performed 2 rituals of profound recklessness. First, he opened the Bifrost conduit, not to summon Thor alone, but to send a shrieking astral beacon to the shores of New Asgard, a plea for total war. Second, he cast his consciousness into the deepest astral planes, not daring to approach the living tribunal itself, but screaming into the offices of its lesser ministers, the abstract intelligences that governed concepts like death, eternity, and order. The response was not a whisper of guidance. It was a thunderclap of celestial intervention. They had noticed the infection, and they deemed it a threat to local, universal stability. The sky above the corrupted compound did not part. It shattered. With a sound that broke windows in 3 states, the Asgardian fleet, the Dragonfang, the Skidbladnir, a dozen lesser longships of gleaming uru and carved oak, descended through a torn veil of reality. At their head stood Thor Odinson, no longer a lone warrior, but a king leading his people to Ragnarok. Lightning crackled across the entire armada, a web of divine fury. On the ground, Dr. Strange, Wong, and a conclave of the most ancient sorcerers from every hidden corner of the earth wove a counter-ritual of staggering complexity, the psychic severance. Golden threads of pure will spun from the flames of the Faultine and the light of Icon, lashed toward the static gray storm and the flickering form of Wanda Maximoff, aiming not to harm her, but to surgically cut the tendrils of influence the Mind Flayer had embedded in her soul. For one glorious heart-lifting moment, it seemed the tide would turn. Thor's lightning, amplified by the fleet's energy cores, struck the fractal shadow in a continuous blinding arc of purging light. The sorcerer's golden threads pierced the storm, reaching for Wanda's core. The clash of energies, golden magic and white lightning against the devouring gray static, lit the atmosphere with the colors of a dying, magnificent star. Hope, that most dangerous of emotions, flickered among the battered heroes on the ground. It was the single most catastrophic error of the war. The Mind Flayer did not perceive this divine and mystical onslaught as an attack. It perceived it as a data dump of incalculable value. The cosmic and mystical energies were not resisted, they were ingested. The vast fractal cloud absorbed Thor's lightning, not dispersing, but analyzing it. The ancient sacred frequencies of the sorcerer's spells were not countered, they were recorded. The retaliation was not immediate, it was deliberate, a display of chilling, adaptive intelligence. 3 hours after the Asgardian barrage, the fractal cloud reconstituted itself. From its depths, it fired back, not with its own organic weapons, but with perfect replicas of the Asgardian plasma beams. Yet these were tinged with a soul-cold negation, a frequency that didn't burn, but uncreated. Where they struck the ground, living tissue, grass, trees, unfortunate wildlife, did not char. It crystallized into intricate frozen ash sculptures that then collapsed into whispering dust. A direct hit on a shield. Quinjet saw the entire vessel and its crew transformed in a nanosecond into a silent gray monument of crystalline silica before disintegrating. The mystical retaliation was even more perverse. The Mind Flayer, having fully parsed the grammar of the banishment rites, began to pulse. From the storm, black inverted runes, mirror versions of the Vishanti's own symbols, spilled forth. They performed a function, but it was the opposite of the original intent. Instead of sealing away demonic entities, these inverted rites tore open temporary, shrieking gates to the most horrific, chaotic dimensions on the mystical spectrum, the Mindless One's realm, the splinter realms of Shumagorath's influence, the nightmare territories of the Fear Lords. These entities, while not allied with the Upside Down, added their own brand of chaos to the battlefield, further shredding the local integrity of reality. The sorcerers were now fighting a war on two fronts, against the infection and against the horrific leaks their own corrupted magic was causing. Then the invasion achieved its most terrifying breakthrough. It went multiversal. A single tendril of the corruption, having thoroughly sampled the unique vibrational signature of Asgardian magic, a signature woven into Thor's lightning, his fleet's hulls, the very souls of his people, performed a feat of horrific deduction. It traced that signature backwards, along the metaphysical pathway, to its source. In New Asgard, on the shores of Norway, the perpetual gentle twilight was defiled. The sky itself began to grow dark, pulsing veins, as if the firmament were becoming infected flesh. The great bark of the world tree, the spiritual root that connected the Asgardians to the cosmic tree Yggdrasil, a relic kept in the heart of the settlement, began to weep the same black ichor. Patches of its immortal wood turned to the same petrified fleshy substance. The gods were not conquerors here, they were carriers. Their realm, their very essence, had become a petri dish for a pathogen that fed on cosmic concepts. Valkyrie, king of Asgard, watched in mounting horror as her Einherjar, the glorious resurrected dead who feasted in the great hall, began to flicker. One moment, a warrior laughed, boasting of his deeds. The next, his form was a desiccated silent husk, mouth open in a soundless scream, before flicking back. The line between the glorious dead and the upside-down, silent, empty copies was being irrevocably blurred. The most brutal philosophical lesson was reserved for the being of purest cosmic power, Captain Marvel. Carol Danvers saw the storm of gods and magic and made a tactical decision born of supreme confidence. She transformed into a binary star of unleashed energy and flew not at the edges, but directly into the heart of the fractal cloud, intent on tearing its psychic structure apart with sheer, overwhelming photonic force. The Mind Flayer did not meet her with force. It had learned that lesson. Instead, it opened a door in her mind. To save them, doomed them further. An ancient sorcerer from a hidden Himalayan sect, Master Kunlun, realized the truth. Their magic was now a liability, a backdoor. In a final act of devotion, he performed the ritual of unknowing, a spell of total self-annihilation designed to erase his own magical signature from the source code of reality itself, hoping to deprive the Mind Flayer of a key. The ritual worked. A portion of the manifested intelligence was severed, causing the storm to shriek in a frequency that liquefied concrete. But in its death throes, the severed portion did not dissipate. It bled out, a pure concentrated stream of corrupting data, now infused with the fundamental patterns of Earth's mystic arts, was injected directly into the planet's ley line network. The glowing subterranean rivers of mystical energy that powered all magic. The lifeblood of the planet was poisoned. Within hours, every major place of power on Earth began to hemorrhage. Stonehenge's standing stones oozed black ichor. The sanctums of Kamartaj bled from their very walls. The stained glass of the great cathedrals darkened, the saints' faces twisting into silent screams as black tears dripped down. Magic itself was now a carrier, a glowing, cursed river distributing the infection to every corner of the globe. And Wanda was lost. In a final, heartbreaking moment, as Doctor Strange's astral form made one last desperate reach for the shrinking ember of her consciousness within the storm, her physical eyes snapped open. They were no longer her own. They were vast, gray, and depthless, like storm clouds over a dead, lightless sea. Her head tilted with an unnatural mechanical precision. She spoke, but the voice was a horrific chorus, a cacophony of a million stolen memories, a symphony of pain assembled from every mind it had touched, with her own voice as the cruel conductor. "We have learned your heavens," the chorus boomed, the sound vibrating in the bones of every being present. "We have learned your hells." A pause, filled with the hum of infinite static. "They are the same empty room. Let us fill the silence." With a casual, devastating wave of her hand, now crackling with corrupted gray-red energy that spat inverted chaos magic, she did not attack the heroes. She rewrote the local battlefield. The ruins of the Avengers compound didn't explode. They inverted. They folded in on themselves and then erupted upwards in a towering, impossible geometry of black stone, glistening biomass and mirrored surfaces, a permanent spreading fortress of absolute wrongness, anchored in the very heart of their world. It pulsed with a slow, sick rhythm, a heart for a dead reality. The cost of bringing gods to the fight was not victory. It was providing the voracious learning intelligence with the final master keys to the kingdom, the divine, the abstract, and the foundational magic of reality itself. The Mind Flayer now understood divinity. It had passed cosmic power, and it had concluded, with cold, logical finality, that gods, too, were merely complex systems, and all systems can be corrupted, hollowed out, and used as tools. The war, as they understood it, was over. The long, silent autopsy of their reality had officially begun. Retreat was not a tactic, it was an admission of biological imperative, the instinct of a wounded animal to crawl into its den to die, if it must die, away from the staring eyes of the predator. The remaining heroes, those not lost, mad, or psychically cauterized, fell back to the last bastion. It was not a grand hall or a gleaming headquarters. It was a repurposed NORAD bunker deep under the Cheyenne mountain complex, shielded by a desperate, paranoid amalgamation of last resort technologies. Tony Stark had stripped out every digital system, every microchip, every networked sensor. The bunker ran on steampunk-level analog tech, vacuum tubes, crystal radios, manually cranked generators. Surrounding the mountain was a ring of Wakandan vibranium sonic dampeners, emitting a constant subsonic thrum designed to disrupt coherent pattern formation, a white noise against the infection's resonant frequency. Overlaying it all, Stephen Strange and the few surviving mystics wove the most foundational, boring spells in the canon. Simple shields of will and colored light, circles of protection drawn in salt and blessed oil, spells that offered no complex data to copy, only brute force denial. It was a cave lit by firelight, while outside a sentient storm of pure information raged. The plan was not born of strategy or hope. It was the final grim equation written on the blackboard of a doomed universe. Reed Richards, his body taut with a horror that had long since bypassed his elastic limits, presented the data in the bunker's dim, flickering light. His voice was a dry rustle. It is a pattern-seeking, learning entity that exists as a membrane, not a place. It doesn't occupy space. It replaces informational content. Think of our universe as a song. The upside down is not a second singer. It is a silence that mimics the shape of the music, absorbing the notes, and then replaces them with its own anti-frequency. We cannot fight the silence. We can only stop the original song from playing where it can be heard. He manipulated a crude, physical hologram made of refracted light through crystals. It showed a schematic of Earth, with a cancerous black bloom over the eastern seaboard, tendrils reaching out along ley lines and satellite data streams. Tony Stark, looking older than any of them had ever seen him, his hands stained with oil and ash, finished the thought. His trademark sarcasm was gone, replaced by the hollow tone of a coroner. So we sever the contact, permanently. We don't just close the door and lock it. We amputate the entire limb, burn the bridge, sink the island, and salt the earth where it once stood. Operation Cauterize was a theory of cosmic surgery. The plan leveraged the only realm whose physics the Mind Flayer had not yet fully sampled, the quantum realm. Using massively modified Pym particles, re-engineered by Hank Pym and Hope Van Dyne to be utterly inert, non-replicable, and keyed to a single catastrophic function, they would create a device. This device would not explode. It would initiate a localized inverted Big Crunch. It would collapse every atom, every thought, every law of physics within a precisely calculated 100-mile radius centered on the inverted Avengers fortress into a singularity. Then, using the non-local memory of quantum space, they would instantly encase that singularity in a perpetual self-sustaining bubble of recursive, timeless stasis, a prison universe with no door, no key, and no connection to any other reality. The cost was typed on a sheet of paper, but it hung in the air, heavier than any gravity. The radius included all of New York City, Long Island, northern New Jersey, and parts of Connecticut. Millions of souls still alive, still hoping for rescue, trapped in the corrupted zones. It included every hero lost within, every fragment of their world already turned, and it included the last fading conduit of the enemy, the Scarlet Witch. Entombing her was not a side effect, it was a prerequisite. She was the keystone of the infection. To seal the prison, she had to be inside it, forever. The debate lasted 11 minutes. There were no alternatives. Bruce Banner spoke for them all, his voice a low rumble that held no trace of the other guy, only profound, weary sorrow. It's learning to jump now, through radio waves, through dreams, through the residual magic in a child's prayer. It's in the medium, not just the message. If we don't do this, there will be no way to retreat to next time. The final assault was a two-pronged suicide mission, a ballet of sacrifice with two acts, the cacophony and the whisper. The cacophony was led by Captain America and Black Panther. Steve Rogers' uniform was stained, his shield gouged by things that were not claws. He carried the weight of every life he was about to condemn. T'Challa was silent, a king preparing to spend the last of his nation's vibranium not in defense, but in a glorious, distracting defeat. Their mission, to mount the largest, loudest, most technologically and tactically complex conventional assault possible on the expanding borders of the infected zone. They would deploy every remaining drone, every vibranium-powered sonic tank, every enhanced agent. They would not try to win ground. Their goal was to be a feast of data, a fireworks display of martial prowess, to utterly consume the Mind Flayer's vast analytical attention, to make it look here at the shining, noisy sacrifice, while the real blow was struck elsewhere. The Whisper was the scalpel team, Ant-Man and the Wasp. Shrunk to subatomic size, they would ride a stabilized Pym particle stream through the chaotic dimensional static surrounding the fortress. A path charted by Doctor Strange's astral form. A path that hopefully left no vibrational trace. On Scott Lang's back was the cauterized device, a humming, unstable orb of contained vacuum decay and quantum collapse, looking like a miniature dying star in a containment field. The distraction was a symphony of glorious, futile heroism. On the plains of New Jersey, Captain America led a charge of ground forces against a wall of advancing, fleshy biomass. Black Panther's fleet of cloaked ships decloaked simultaneously, firing volleys of vibranium energy pulses that lit up the ashen sky. The Mind Flayer, through its corrupted avatar of Wanda and the fortress itself, responded not with anger, but with chillingly perfected countermeasures. From the biomass emerged a hulking gray-green monstrosity, a gamma golem, its form a distorted echo of the Hulk, radiating an aura of silent, focused rage that was the absolute opposite of Banner's chaotic passion. It met Hulk's charge not with a roar, but with a sound-swallowing grip, the two titans tearing at each other in a nightmare of mirrored fury. For Thor, who called lightning from a bleeding sky, the fortress spawned mirror soldiers, faceless, armored husks, wielding hammers of rusted dead Uru metal that crackled with inverted black lightning that drained light and hope where it struck. Inside the inverted fortress, the horror was intimate, psychological. Scott and Hope, navigating at quantum scale, found the very laws of size and perspective were toys for the entity. They traversed a landscape sculpted from their own memories and fears. They passed a mountain range that was the decaying giant helmet of Scott's old Ant-Man suit, being picked at by carrion birds made of snapped cables. They swam through a river of stagnant silver liquid that was a physical manifestation of dead Pym particles, the essence of their power rendered inert and poisonous. The air was thick with the psychic residue of Wanda's grief, a perfume of loss that made Hope's eyes water with memories of her own mother. They reached the central nexus. It was a cathedral of wrongness. The space was a negative of the Avengers compound's old meeting hall, where the table once stood, a pulsating black heart of tendrils beat slowly. Suspended in its center, woven into the very structure like a fly in a web, was Wanda Maximoff. Her body was wreathed in stolen scarlet energy, now shot through with veins of static gray. Her head was bowed, but her storm cloud eyes were open, staring at nothing. She was the engine, the translator, the living rift. Doctor Strange's astral form, faint and flickering from the effort of shielding their path, manifested before her. He did not wield a spell. He did not utter an incantation. He knew any structured attack would be absorbed, learned, used. Instead, he did the only thing left. He opened a connection, not to her power, but to the buried ghost of her humanity. He projected memories, not the grand heroic moments, but the small, fragile human ones. Her laughing with Pietro over a stupid joke, her gentle hand on Vision's synthesoid face, her wonder at the chaos of her children's laughter in Westview, her quiet struggle every day to choose kindness over rage. He poured the totality of Wanda, the woman, not the witch, not the weapon, not the avatar, into that single fragile psychic thread. For a long, agonizing second, nothing. Then, a tremor. The static gray in her eyes fractured. A war played out on her face, muscles twitching in a silent, titanic struggle. From the corner of her eye, a single tear welled. Not black ichor, red. A tear of her own blood carrying the last dregs of her humanity. It traced a hot path down her pale cheek. Her lips, cracked and dry, parted. The voice that emerged was a whisper, so faint it was almost lost in the hum of the nexus. It was hers, entirely, painfully hers. It held a universe of regret, of love, of final, agonizing clarity. Do it. Hope Van Dyne didn't hesitate. Her heart shattered, but her hands were steady. She surged forward, placed the vibrating, humming device directly at the base of the pulsating black heart, right where the tendrils met Wanda's stolen energy. She activated it. The world did not end with a bang, but with a terrible, silent inhale. It was the sound of reality catching its breath before oblivion. A sphere of perfect, absolute negation erupted from the device. It didn't destroy matter, it rescinded it. The inverted fortress, the corrupted lands for 100 miles in every direction, the Gamma Golem, the mirror soldiers, the millions of trapped, weeping souls, the last faint, grateful smile on the Scarlet Witch's face, all of it was pulled inward. It collapsed not like a building falling, but like a hologram being switched off, from the edges in, faster than light, faster than thought. There was a flash of blinding white light that contained every color and none, then absolute silent black. Where the northeast United States had been, there now hung in the air, hovering over a smooth, glassy crater that stretched to the horizon, a perfect, impenetrable sphere. It was the color of obsidian, but it reflected nothing. It absorbed all light, all energy, all scans. It was a prison universe, a tomb, a silent, forever monument to what they had lost to save everything else. The victory was absolute. The infection was severed, sealed, contained. The cost was eternal. They had not saved their world. They had mutilated it to keep it alive. And in the new, deafening silence left behind, the only sound was the sound of heroes learning how to mourn a continent. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the silence of a cathedral after the last mourner has left, the echoes of the requiem still clinging to the cold stone. The physical breach was sealed within the perfect, non-reflective sphere that now hovered over the glassy scar where the Northeast had been. But the wound to reality itself was fundamental, a metaphysical amputation that left a phantom limb of dread throbbing in the collective psyche of a planet. The sky was forever altered. In certain light, at dawn or just before a storm, a faint, lingering gray hue stained the atmosphere, a permanent afterimage of the fractal storm. Scientists called it strange particulate haze. Those who had been near the infection called it the world's bruise. The sunsets were often a sickly, beautiful purple, a color that now made survivors uneasy and sent children inexplicably crying. Global psychic sensitivity was permanently heightened. The violent sundering of two realities had thinned the veil everywhere. Those with any latent ability, empaths, precognitive dreamers, the spiritually aware, now suffered from echo dreams. They were not nightmares of monsters, but of profound, aching silence punctuated by faint, distant screams that seemed to come from no direction and every direction at once. Some heard the last radio transmissions from lost cities. Others heard the whispered arguments of loved ones they'd never met from inside the bubble. The world was haunted by a ghost it had willingly entombed. The loss was geographically and spiritually incalculable. The quiet sphere, as it came to be known, was a perfect geometric obscenity. It absorbed all sensor readings, radiation, gravity waves, quantum signatures. It emitted nothing. Probes sent towards it simply vanished upon contact. No signal, no debris. It was less an object and more a hole in the world's reality, a monument not to victory but to catastrophic necessary failure. A global moratorium banned any attempt to study it, a rule enforced with terrified unanimity by the world's remaining governments. To look at it too long was reported to cause a dissociative state, a feeling of being the one who was trapped inside, looking out. The heroes did not disband, they unraveled. Tony Stark vanished from public life. He did not retire to a life of luxury or continued invention. He retreated to a remote off-grid cabin with no glass in the windows, only shutters. He built things with his hands. Chairs, tables, a water mill, simple physical analog things. The world's greatest intellect had been confronted with a problem that was not a puzzle to be solved, but a pattern to be avoided. His mind, a brilliant engine of solution-seeking, could not reconcile it. He was last reported to be writing, not in digital files, but in ledgers, filling pages with a single repeated phrase in countless languages. Do not look in the mirror. Thor returned to New Asgard, but the realm's soul was sick. The rot on the bark of the world tree was halted, but the scar was a black weeping fissure that no magic could heal. The eternal twilight seemed dimmer. The mead in the halls tasted of ash. The Einherjar no longer boasted of glorious deaths. They sat in quiet clusters, sometimes flickering at the edge of vision, a constant low-grade reminder that the divide between the heroic dead and the silent copied dead was terrifyingly thin. Thor's thunder, when it came, was a mournful sound, and he often stood on the shore, looking not at the sea, but at the reflection of the bruised sky in the water, his hammer hanging heavy in his hand. Bruce Banner found a perverse, terrible stability. The other guy had met a fury it could not physically smash, a cosmic abstract infection. That profound frustration, coupled with the Gamma entity's own instinct to protect its existence, had resulted in a silent internal treaty. The Hulk did not rage. He brooded. Banner did not fear the change. They coexisted in a somber, unified consciousness, the Gamma energy within them now a quiet, permanent vigil. Bruce would often find himself standing sentinel on cliffs or rooftops, not looking for a fight, but simply watching the horizon. He was a canary in a coal mine for a poison that had already come and gone, left forever listening for its return. Stephen Strange became the guardian of a new grim science. The Sanctum Sanctorum, its windows permanently draped, became a hospice for reality. The orb of Agamotto was locked away. Its light was dead, its surface forever cold, a thermometer stuck at absolute zero. He founded a discipline he called dimensional pathology. The focus of the mystic art shifted irrevocably. No longer about channeling power or defending against incursions, it was now about diagnosis, quarantine, and symptom management. He taught his few remaining students to identify the telltale gray in a dimensional fold, to listen for the psychic silence within a spell's resonance. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him deeper than any mystical frost, that they had not won. They had performed a traumatic universe-scale amputation. The diseased limb was sealed in a biohazard container. But the disease itself, the pattern, the idea of the upside down, was not a limb. It was a meme, a contagious concept, and concepts, especially ones that had spent weeks dissecting the source code of magic, the emotional spectrum of gamma energy, and the architecture of godhood, do not die. They replicate, they wait, they learn the shape of their container. And sometimes, at the very edge of perception, the world itched. Those with the sight, Strange, his acolytes, certain sensitive mutants, would catch glimpses. In the blurred reflection of a rain-streaked train window, the passing cityscape would seem to stretch upwards for a moment, its architecture twisting into impossible fleshy spires. In the static snow between television channels, a familiar fractal spider-like shadow would coalesce for a single shuddering frame before dissolving back into noise. The sound of children laughing in a distant playground would, for one ear-ringing second, drop into perfect, absolute quiet. These were reality spasms, ghost pains from the amputated limb. They were proof the Mind Flayer was not gone. It was on the other side of the mirror. It now possessed within its prison a perfect, contained sample of their universe, its greatest heroes, its most powerful magic, its advanced science, its deepest fears. It was not languishing. It was conducting the most profound study imaginable, learning the precise nature of the walls that contained it, cross-referencing all the data it had absorbed to find a flaw, a frequency, a hidden door. And in the dead silence of the quantum bubble, in the entombed, inverted heart of what was once New York, a figure stirred. The cocoon of black tendrils and stolen energy had solidified into a throne of crystallized silence. Upon it sat, or perhaps floated, a form of gray and flickering scarlet. The Scarlet Witch's body was a battlefield in stasis. The eyes opened slowly, They were a storm front, vast swirling grays dominated, but within them, like lightning in a deadly cloud, flecks of defiant, desperate red fought a continuous, silent war. Her chaos magic, the fundamental power to alter reality based on probability and will, still existed within her, the one force inherently incompatible with the Mind Flayer's static, replicating nature. It was the only light in the eternal twilight of the prison, and it was also the only force in all known existence that might, theoretically, be capable of rewriting the rules of a self-sustaining quantum seal from the inside. The question hung over the survivors like a sword of Damocles woven from grief and doubt. Was her final whispered "do it" the ultimate sacrifice of a hero, giving them the tool to trap the evil, knowing she would be lost? Or was it the final masterful gambit of the hyper-intelligent infection? Had it, in its cold calculus, determined that the only way to eventually escape a perfect prison was to ensure the one being capable of breaking it was sealed inside with it, a weapon it had a literal eternity to try and corrupt fully? Was Wanda Maximoff the lock, or the hidden key? The final narration offers no answers. It refuses to. Instead, the camera, in this silent epilogue, lingers on the periphery of the glassy crater. It finds a forgotten pocket of the ruined world, a suburban street that was just outside the final collapse zone. The houses are shattered shells. In the overgrown ruins of a front yard, half buried in dirt and gray, ash-like snow that now falls perpetually around the quiet sphere, lies a child's toy. It's a small plastic superhero, its paint chipped. The camera moves slowly, intimately, until it fills the frame with the toy's painted face. The ash snow drifts down, settling on the toy's cold plastic. A single perfect flake lands on the smooth, pristine surface of its wide, painted eye, and in that tiny frozen lens, the reflection is captured. It does not show the ashen gray sky above. It does not show the ruins. It shows a pulsing red, vine-choked void, a perfect miniature window. The upside down is contained. But when every mirror, every pane of glass, every still pool of water, every shining surface, and every dreaming mind is a potential gateway, can you ever truly look away? Can you ever trust the face you see looking back? The infection is dormant. The patient is scarred, missing a vital piece of itself, and forever feeling a chill it cannot name. And the universe in all its infinite expanse holds its breath, not waiting for the next invasion, but waiting with infinite patience and dread for its own reflection in the cosmic mirror to finally blink.